Hi, I'm John Moulis, and welcome to a special edition of the Moulis Report, where I talk about the new report which has just been released about reforming the welfare system in Australia. Now, this report has been anticipated for quite a while, ever since the Abbott government came to office. Now, it is a report, the aim of which is to streamline welfare payments in Australia. Well, that's what we were told. We were told that there were too many welfare payments in Australia, that they wanted to streamline the whole heap of them into about 8 or 9 payments, where there'd be supplementary bonuses. Well, it's very hard to understand exactly what they intended to do, because a lot of the reporting about this has been conjecture. Much of it has been pure supposition by the Murdoch newspapers, in particular the Daily Telegraph. Now, I haven't been reading The Australian, but I could well understand, being familiar with that paper's hardline, loony right propaganda. I mean, that's why I stopped reading that newspaper about 10 years ago. But I would suggest that they've been going just as hard as the Daily Telegraph has been going on this issue. Now, I've said it before on the Moulis Report that all of this hype about welfare bludgers, about rorters, everything else is due to Rupert Murdoch's personal views. Rupert Murdoch personally hates people on welfare. He thinks they're bludgers, he thinks they're rorters, and he sends out tweets using these words, and inevitably the front page of his newspapers the next day or the day after has a beat up about welfare rorters and bludgers. And of course, this scenario of welfare rorters and bludgers plays out really well in the western suburbs. Now, for some reason, Rupert Murdoch has been trying to garner this blue-collar, working-class demographic. I don't know why, because those people don't have all that much money. They're battlers, they're unsophisticated, and they're not a desirable demographic. But for some reason, Rupert Murdoch and the parasites who feed off his newspapers, they seem to be keen on harvesting this demographic in the western suburbs and the unsophisticated people in the country areas. Now, on the other hand, the Fairfax newspapers, they go after the AB demographic. That is, people on the North Shore, people with lots of money. And so therefore, they're a lot more desirable to advertisers. I mean, you only have to pick up The Australian, leaf through it, and there's no advertising at all in that newspaper. Hardly any advertising, because people just won't advertise to a demographic that really doesn't exist. I mean, I've said it before that The Australian isn't a mainstream newspaper anymore. It isn't even a newspaper anymore. The Australian is a paid newsletter distributed each day to Rupert Murdoch's personal fan club. You know, it isn't a mainstream newspaper. It is exactly like the magazines that the Beatles used to produce for members of their fan club. The Australian is a newsletter for Rupert Murdoch's fan club and his cheer squad. Now, the Daily Telegraph, that is aimed towards people in the western suburbs. They've been running a campaign for a couple of months now, Fair Go for the West, and they've been trying to garner that area of Sydney, that growth area of Sydney. And that's why we're seeing all of these stories about welfare bludgers, rorters, all that, because that plays very well with the unsophisticated demographic. You can have programs like A Current Affair, with their hidden camera exposés about rorters. You know, people rorting compo and people rorting the disability support pension. And of course it gives a very biased, one-eyed view about the disabled. And that is the problem that disabled people and their advocates have in expressing their views. Because outwardly a lot of disabled people look like normal people. You know, they act like normal people, but in the case of mental illness, you have mental illnesses which stop people doing everyday things. Normal, everyday things that other people take for granted. For example, I've already told you that I'm on the disability support pension. I have a permanent mental disability. I have Asperger's syndrome, which is a form of autism, and I have been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I'd previously had manic depression. I'm not going to call it bipolar, it is manic depression. It's a form of depression. Now, I tried working for 10 years and it was absolute hell because, like I said, I'd be told to do certain things and I would be incapable of doing those things. And I'd explain to them, I can't do that. And they couldn't understand why. For example, I was doing photocopying at Department of Finance and we had a photocopier there and the guy from Nashua, which was the brand which made it, came in and told me about the pause button on it. You do copies, and if another person comes in with other copying, you press this pause button, you do the other copying, and then press the pause button again, go back to the original copying. And I said to the operator, I said, I can't do that, because I just can't do that sort of thing. I have to do all of it at once. And of course, I reluctantly went on to the disability support pension. I didn't want to. I wanted to work. I was on the dole for years, but I was told that with my record in the workforce of not being able to do basic jobs at all, that I should go on the disability support pension. So I did. There is a danger with this review that the government has announced that people like me who show no outward signs of disability will be unfairly targeted. Now, I reiterate here that mental illness is a permanent and ongoing disability, that people with mental illness in most cases look perfectly normal, like me. I look perfectly normal. And I mentioned programs like A Current Affair with their hidden camera exposés. You could put a hidden camera in the gym where I go to and show me doing squats of 100 kilos. You could put a hidden camera in the swimming pool where I go to. Sorry about the coughing, it's the middle of winter and I've got a bit of a cold at the moment. Anyway, you could put a hidden camera in the swimming pool where I go to and show me doing, 20 laps. And you can put that on A Current Affair saying, John Moulis is on the disability support pension and he's there in the gym squatting 100 kilos and he's there in the pool doing laps. Like I said, most disabilities are mental illness, ongoing, permanent, debilitating mental illness like I have. And, you can put that on A Current Affair and people will tut-tut and say, ooh, he's getting compo, he's rorting the system and everything. But it just isn't true. Now, this impression of people on disability support pensions being bludgers and rorters and shirkers, it had another run today. I've got here today's Sunday Telegraph. If you can see that there, the headline, Disabling Rorters. And it talks about the suggested changes to the disability support pension by this review that the government has announced. Now, with that attitude disabling rorters, you know, the impression is given that all people on disability support pension are rorters. Now, Samantha Maiden has another column inside that newspaper, well inside that newspaper, saying that most people on disability support pension aren't rorting the system. Well, the sub-editors taking their cue from Rupert Murdoch in New York, they've already made up their mind with banner headlines like that, disabling rorters. But like I said, there is a danger that a lot of people who are worthy of being on the disability support pension will be caught up in this review if it goes ahead. Now, if it goes ahead, the government has the opportunity not to accept the findings of this review, but if it goes ahead, of course, it has to get through the Senate. And in the past, the Greens, the Labor Party and the Independents have said that they will not back cruel crackdowns on welfare. And it is hoped that they'll come through this time. Or like I said in my last review, the government is looking shaky at the moment. They're not looking as shaky as they did before, because the climate changes with the Palmer United Party supporting the government, that has changed the dynamic a little bit. So the Abbott government isn't looking as shaky as it did a month or so ago. But still, the Senate has the option to block supply and send the government to a double dissolution. And if we have a Labor government by the end of the year, this whole welfare review will be all academic anyway. It'll just disappear into the ether and Labor will be in power again. But if this review goes ahead, and this story says something about, where is it? Well, it's not there on the front page, but I read it earlier. It said that something like 300,000 people will be thrown off the disability support pension if this review goes ahead. Now that's 300,000 people suddenly having their welfare payment taken off them. Now, what are those people going to do? I mean, there seems to be this attitude within conservative circles that you can just cut people's welfare check, throw people off welfare, and those people will disappear. You just cut off their welfare, those people will just disappear, no longer a problem. But the fact is, they will be a problem, because those people still have to be fed and watered. They still have to be housed. They still have to have a whole lot of services, because they're still alive. They're still there. So what are they going to do? Are they going to go on to the dole, onto New Start? Well, that seems to be what will happen. So you're going to have a whole lot of people being forced to go on to a lower payment in order to live. Conservatives don't seem to understand that sort of thing. They live in this little utopia, this little fantasy world of survival of the fittest and the law of the jungle, where you have to go out to work. You have to earn money. You have to work. You have to earn money. And that's it. One size fits all. This attitude that everybody has to do this, it's compulsory. Well, the fact is that there are certain people in the community who can't do this, who can't live this sort of life. People like me. When I left school, I went into the workforce. I hated it. I was having problems all the time, complaints all the time, not being able to do basic things. I stuck at it for years because I was told that this was life, that this was the system we had in Australia, that you had to do this. So I stuck at it. I hated every minute of it. And I was looking at other people. I was looking at the kids across the road. There was this boy who lived across the road. He started in the public service a couple of years after me, and him and I used to meet each other when we got off the bus near our houses, and we used to talk to each other walking back to our houses. And he was saying, do you see a career in there in the public service? And I said, no, I see a job there, but I don't see a career. And of course, I never saw him again. He never got on the bus at all. And I was just wondering, because I'm not a friendly person, I wasn't mates with him or anything, and I didn't know what happened. And then a couple of years later, or about a year or 2 years later, my mother told me that kid was now a Class 9 director, 3rd Division Public Service, Class 9 director in the public service, and he had his own BMW. So I was there still as a base grader in the public service, hating every minute of it, and this kid across the road, he was a Class 9 director, earning, 100 grand a year, I think, at least, with a BMW, and he was taking overseas trips and everything like that. And there I was, struggling on, and I was just there shaking my head, wondering why this was happening. And it was a common story. Other people my age were moving ahead. They were buying expensive cars. They were going overseas. They were getting married. They were having kids. All of these things that are supposed to happen to you after you leave school and you grow up. But with me, they just weren't happening, and I couldn't understand why. But I was told, just stick at it. This is life. This is the system we have in Australia. And of course I did stick at it, not knowing that I did have a mental disability, which was preventing me from working and preventing me from having all those things that all the other people my age were having. So you're going to have a whole lot of people unsuited for the workforce, being forced to work, and you're going to have all of this disruption in the workplace because of that. I mean, every couple of days, complaints going in against me at the public service. Resources being diverted into counselling me, trying to turn me around, trying to turn me into a good little boy. And of course it failed. It just caused resentment with me, and it was a total exercise in futility. You're going to have a whole lot of people on the disability support pension being forced to work, being forced into the workforce, so the productivity is going to reduce. You're going to have all of these personal problems being introduced into the workplace now. You're going to have people intolerant of the disabled being forced to make allowances for the disabled. And the fact is, I was disabled in the workforce. People could see that I was having problems, and they made no allowances for me. On the contrary, they stepped up their campaign of bullying and intimidation and harassment against me. They stepped it up because they wanted me to be sacked. They wanted me out of the place because I was disruptive, because they didn't want to work with me. They didn't want to work with a mentally ill person, with a mentally disabled person. You're going to have a whole lot of people with mental disabilities in the workforce being subjected to what I was subjected to for 10 years. And mental illness is going to get worse. My mental illness got steadily worse each time a complaint went in against me. I left the public service completely unable to function. It took me months to recover when I was sacked from the public service twice. Well, technically I resigned, but it was resign or be sacked. You're going to have a whole lot of people who are going to be unhappy, who are going to be forced to do things they don't want. So I think that this review into the disabled has to be done very carefully into the disability support pension. Don't harm the people most vulnerable. Thank you for listening to this, and goodbye.